Hi everyone, welcome back to Intermediate Ukulele with me, Matt Stead. This video is going to be all about chucking and muting. I'm going to show you a couple of different techniques for both and show you why they're very different and how they can be used. I'm also going to show you a really cool way of adding a reggae drum to some of your songs. It's really easy, really effective, and most of all, heaps of fun. Let's have a look at chucking first, often called chunking or chunking without the U. It's kind of an onomatopoeic way to describe a sound that we can produce on the ukulele to provide a percussive effect when we're strumming. It's used commonly on songs like Somewhere Over the Rainbow. If I slow that down, can you hear this? That noise there, that's the chunk. Let's have a look at how we can do that. There's a couple of ways we can do it, and there are a couple of misleading videos I've noticed on the internet, so I'm going to try and clear up a few facts as we do it as well to make it as easy as possible for you and as effective as possible too. Now, when I was learning this, there are a few really misleading videos on the internet that drove me absolutely balmy, and they might have done the same thing to you. A lot of teachers will teach you to chuck with the right hand simply by strumming down and then muting the strings with your right hand. And whilst this is partly true, that never truly produces a chuck sound. And I've known loads of my students go mad saying, I've been doing it and speeding it up, but it still doesn't sound like a chuck. And the problem is, this is more of a mute. And even as we speed it up, unless we go a million miles an hour, like that, which is quite an aggressive way to chuck, you're still going to hear the strings ringing out and then a mute. But there's something else going on with the hand that produces the chuck sound that everybody does, but quite a few teachers forget to tell you about. So I'm going to do it. I'm going to show you how to do it. So let's have a look at the first way of chucking, which is using our right hand. So let's show you that technique just by strumming down on all open strums. Let's go really, really slowly. Let me show you the mechanics of it first. What we can do, and there's a couple of ways of doing this, I'll show you both, is basically as soon as we strum down, we want to open our hand up and push it against the strings. So what we're not doing is this. It's as immediately as my finger hits the strings, it starts to open up, and my palm, and really it's this part of the palm more than any other part, is pushing immediately against the strings. So it's one process, it's not two processes, it's not a strum and then a mute. As I strum down, watch this part of my palm here. As I strum down, almost immediately that palm is touching the strings, roughly above the sound hole. So in slow motion, watch this. Okay, now you don't have to make it as exaggerated as that with just this part of the palm hitting. You can flatten down more if you prefer. But the important thing, and this is what I really want to distinguish from other videos, is that it's one movement. It's not a strum and a touch. As I'm strumming, my palm is coming down and it's touching the strings. It will take you quite a long time to get that really, really clean. You have to really go at it very, very slowly. So let's do that in super slow motion. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Notice my hand opening up as it's passing over the strings. It's almost like I'm unraveling and flattening. Now if we start to slow that, the opposite of slowing down, sorry, if we start to speed up even, ever so slightly, whoops, 1, 2, 3, 4. Can you hear that sound of the chuck coming? Because my hand is immediately touching the strings. And if I was to really speed up, there we go. Can you hear that lovely chuck sound? So my hand is coming down over the strings, opening up and immediately slamming down. I say slamming, but it's still relatively gentle. Look, I'm not pushing hard against my uke. Relatively gentle and into the ukulele fretboard. That is version 1. Now the second way of right hand chucking comes with a bit of a caveat. Personally, I don't use this very often, so I'm not the best at it, I'll be completely honest. But it's really important to say there's no right or wrong way. Any way you can make these noises and make your ukulele sound nice is totally cool. Don't worry about the rules, okay? But when I chuck, I tend to use this part of my palm as I've shown you. So as I'm coming down, that part of my palm there is the one that's touching the strings and stopping them ringing out. Now I've noticed a lot of musicians, rather than opening out this way, where your hand almost opens up and then mute, they tend to keep it closed and they actually rotate through so that the thumb, this side here, can you see, is muting the strings. Now it's quite neat in one way, because rather than ending up in this position, which can be kind of a bit awkward to then get back into another strum, this way is kind of cool because you're in a natural strumming position. So if you want to try it, you're coming down with your index finger over the strings, and immediately this thumb is rotating round and touching those strings and muting them. Yet again, as I said, unlike the other videos, I don't want you to think of it as two movements, this and this. Notice it's one movement, a rotation and a stop. So, chuck. Let's do it slow motion. 1, 2, 3, 4. Notice as we speed up, 2, 3, 4. There it is. 1, 2, 3, 4. Once you reach that peak velocity, you hear the chuck or the chunk. And until you reach that kind of peak velocity, it will sound a little bit like open strings and a mute. But you'll get there just gradually rotating round, letting the thumb touch those strings. Fantastic. Let's have a look at how to mute with the left hand. Then I'll show you a really simple way of putting all of these options into some chords, into a song. Left hand muting is, in some ways, is a bit easier and more natural for many people. It's certainly how I tend to chuck when I'm doing it. But again, there's no right or wrong, and some people will use a mixture of both. But in effect, what we're doing when we're chucking with the left hand is we're basically placing any fingers, I'll show you which, and I'll go into a lot more detail in a minute. But we're placing any fingers across the strings of the fretboard, and the important thing is not pressing. If I was to press down, I get a chord, right? But if I put my fingers there and I don't press at all, so just a feather-light touch on the strings, there's our chuck. Straight away, without having to do any effort with the right hand, all I'm doing is strumming down, I have a chuck. Now, some of those naughty videos I was telling you about earlier on YouTube will quite often show you how to play a chord and then do this. Kind of works, but imagine you're playing something super quick. It's really awkward to go from a chord position to here. So there are some easy things that we can do to keep our fingers down on a chord and get that chucking noise. Let's have a look at them. So if we're strumming away on a chord and we want to add a chuck in at any point, we don't want to take this finger away from a chord and then have to put it back again. So what we do is we introduce as many fingers as it takes. I'll tend to use 1 or 2 just to cover the strings. Now, when we're covering the strings, these fingers don't have to be this side of the chord. They can be this side of the chord. They can be anywhere whatsoever, as long as they're muting those strings, stopping them ringing out. So I could play a C chord, introduce some fingers here, and take all the pressure away and strum, and I have a chord, chuck, chord, chuck, chord, chuck, chord. Now here's the crucial thing. Again, this often is not covered in a lot of these videos. As you introduce these fingers, you also need to take the pressure off this finger, because otherwise that finger is going to cause a string to ring out. So you'll have this noise, which won't work. That's not chuck, is it? When you're hearing a noise. So even as I'm introducing these fingers, I also need to take the pressure out of this hand. So think of it as squeeze, release, squeeze, release. So I'm squeezing this finger when I'm playing the chord, and then when I'm introducing these two, I'm releasing the pressure. So just a feather-light touch. Try this with me. 1, 2, 3, 4. Strum, chuck, strum, chuck, strum, chuck, strum, chuck. Fantastic. Let's have a look at different chords. A G major chord can be quite tricky when we're doing this chuck, because we have this open string here along the top which wants to ring out. Have a listen. Can you hear it? And even though I'm releasing the pressure of these 3 strings here, I'm still hearing this string vibrate. So what have we got to do? We've got to introduce a finger to mute this string. So what I tend to do is just very lightly take my pinky or my little finger, and I'll reach up and I'll just touch it against that string. In fact, as my little finger is coming this side of the chord, I might as well just lay it across all 4 strings very lightly. Can you see that? And then as I strum down, it's muting all 4 strings, and I have that lovely chuck sound with no effort with my right hand at all. It's all just that left hand. Have a practice of that. Again, I'm doing squeeze, release, squeeze, release. 1, chuck, 2, chuck. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Fantastic. Well done, everyone. If you find that you're hearing this sound, all you're doing is you're pushing that finger down too hard. It's a feather-light touch. There we go. Let's try it on another chord. Let's try an F chord. So this one's fairly simple. We're placing our F chord down, and we need to introduce something to mute the 2 strings that aren't being pressed down. And I just quite simply use both my little finger and my 3rd finger just to steady itself, and I'm just touching down on the strings with these 2. You could use either of them, but I tend to find both is easier to flatten down. And again, squeeze, release, squeeze, release, squeeze, release, squeeze, release. Fantastic. So the principle is the same on any chord, an A minor. Those fingers come down, they cover the strings, and I strum. And it's as simple as that. E7, there's only 1 string open, but I still need to cover it with that finger. Fantastic, well done. If you're doing bar chords, it's even easier, because all we need to do, squeeze for a strum, and then just release all the pressure out of this left hand, and that gives us our chunk. Squeeze, relax, squeeze, relax, squeeze, relax, squeeze, relax. That's one of the reasons that many players will play bar chords up the fretboard when they're playing kind of old time and ragtime music, that kind of, because it makes it really easy to squeeze and chunk. So let's have a look at some simple chords that we can play to practice this chucking right hand and left hand. A pitfall a lot of people will fall into straight away is to try and overcomplicate things too quickly. Don't try adding this chuck to an island strum or a ragtime strum or anything like that too quickly. Let's just keep it really simple and get the mechanics of the chuck right first, and then come back later on in the course to some interesting strums that we can add it to. So just for now, what I want you to practice, and you can do this both ways, either with your right hand chucks or left hand chucks. I'm going to use left hand chucks because it's what I've just been explaining and it's the easiest for me to do. That's the chuck that I use personally, because I find if I use my left hand, I can go as quick as I want for my right hand and it doesn't have to alter anything. I can just strum away and the left hand deals with all of the chucking. But your mileage may vary. Now, because of copyright issues, I'm not actually going to sing this next song. I've been told off by YouTube. So you're just going to strum along and you can look back at an earlier video to find the song, or you can just sing along as we go using these chords C, G, F and back to C. And a little hint, when you sing this song, it will stop you worrying and it will make you be happy. Okay, here we go. We're going to do 2 lots of 4 on each chord, C, G, F, and back to C. You'll soon get the idea. 1, 2, 3, 4, C. And now G. Lovely. And an F. C. And just keep that going round. Let's go again. C. And a G. Little finger. Yeah. And an F. And back to a C. Fantastic. We'll cover more complex patterns later on, but if you are feeling confident enough, you can try a simple swing strum, which would be, doesn't matter whether you're on an up or a down, but it's basically up, down, chunk, up, down, chunk, or it could be down, chunk. Remember, I don't like to get too much into strum patterns. Up, down, chunk, up, down, chunk, up, down, chunk. It's a really lovely one to practice. Notice, because my left hand is doing all the work, my right hand doesn't do anything different other than strumming up and down. Isn't that cool? So let's have a look at muting. A muted strum, believe it or not, is a totally different thing to a chuck. A chuck, we have that very percussive attack, right? You can hear it, it's onomatopoeic. Chuck, chuck, chuck. A mute, you don't hear anything. I mean, the clue's in the name, isn't it? A mute. So when we mute a strum, what we do is we strum the strings and then we deaden them completely. So there's no chuck sound, there's open strings and no noise at all in effect. And a muted strum is dead simple. All we need to do is strum the strings and put our hands down, and you can use any fingers to cover the strings. Now, if you have this sound, you're pushing too hard. So as you come down, let's try all the open strings and then a mute. We're just going to strum down, thumb, index finger, however you want, and just touch as light as a feather to stop those strings ringing out. Okay. Now, if we're doing a bar chord such as D7, just like the chuck, this is really easy because all we need to do is squeeze and then just let all the pressure. You can see my arm tensing up as I press and then releasing. Just let all the pressure go and that gives you a muted strum. So rather than the chord sounding like this, it now sounds like this. Okay, I strum and release. 1, 2, 3, 4. Great. Now on a G chord, for instance, let's try a jazz chord. Let's try a G major 7, a new chord. It's a gorgeous sounding chord. Isn't that lovely? A G major 7 is similar to a G major. Here's our G major. It's only one note difference. The note here, this G, is flattened to become an F sharp. Don't worry about that in a moment. There's an easier way of doing it than that though. We're just going to put our finger over the bottom 3 strings to nearest the floor of the 2nd fret and strum. The reason I'm using a G major 7 as opposed to a normal G chord is it's going to sound gorgeous in this jazz progression that I'm going to do in a moment. A muted strum sounds really lovely with jazz music. Now when we strum this one, we can mute by releasing the pressure out of this finger, but we still have the problem of this open G string along the top, which is going to ring out, isn't it? So what I need to do is introduce one or more fingers to the right of the chord and just feather touch, just touch those strings and it will stop the chord dead. Now I also release the tension from this finger. So squeeze, release, squeeze, release, squeeze, release, squeeze, release, and it gives you a lovely muted strum. Let's put those together. We're going to do all the open strings. Don't worry about why for now, but all of the open strings played as a chord can be called either a C6 or an A minor 7. We're going to use it as an A minor 7 in this context. We're going to strum them open as an A minor 7 and then mute them 4 times. As easy as that. Then we're going to play a D7 chord barred. Okay, bar across the 2nd fret. 3rd finger here, and we're going to do the same thing. Remember, because we're playing a bar chord, all we need to do is strum and release. Push, release, push, release. No need for any extra fingers because releasing the pressure mutes the strum all by itself. And then we're going to do a G major 7 chord and we're going to introduce one or more fingers next to it. Here we go. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Isn't that lovely? That's a start to Autumn Leaves. Those falling leaves. Drift by my window. Isn't that lovely? Lovely set of chords and a really lovely way to practice a mute. Notice the difference between the mutes. Very mellow, and the chunk. The chunk is very percussive. The mute is almost like the inverse of that, but it suggests rhythm. Notice, by the way, that as I was muting, I was using the pad of my thumb to strum because that gives a mellow sound which matches it perfectly. Have an experiment with that. Try those chords I just taught you, A minor 7, D7, and G major 7, and have loads of fun. And to finish off, as a little bonus, let's have a look at a really cool simple reggae strum. When I play reggae, more often than not, the ukulele is just an accompaniment to a voice, so you want it to be nice and basic and steady with a rhythm. So when I play reggae music, this is the strum that I use more often than anything else in the technique, and it gives you the sound of a drum as well as the sound of an accompaniment instrument. And with reggae music, the strong beats are on the off beats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Hear that on the 2 and the 4. Or you could even think of it, depending on what timing and how you're counting it, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. But notice it's the every other beat where we actually hear the chord, not the strong downbeat, the first beat of each measure. Now, there's a really easy way of doing this. We hold a chord down, such as C, and what we do first of all is we use the palm and fingers of our right hand to pop down onto the ukulele top. Have an experiment, because where you do this will give you different sounds. It's almost like a snare drum up here, more like a bass drum down here. But wherever you do it will give you a different tone. But in essence, we're slapping down. I also want to make sure as I slap down that this bit of my hand isn't arched. I actually want it to touch flat against the strings so that it mutes them dead. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Try it with me. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold down a C chord and do it. Won't make a noise at the moment. 3, 4. But for the chord, notice how easy it is to go from this position to just strum up with your index finger. And it's the flesh side of our index finger coming up. Tap, strum, tap, strum, tap, strum, tap, strum. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Isn't that lovely and effective and dead simple? We could do it on a G chord. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. Let's try an F. Notice as we change chords, we can move our fingers as we come down, which is buying you time as well to get that chord ready, which is super cool. Now, I'm not going to give you a song to play along to right now, but if you use a song that makes you stop worrying and be happy, it's a perfect way to practice that. So maybe have a go on those chords. G, F, and C. And just keep that going round. Notice I'm just tapping and coming up my index finger. It's that simple, a really simple reggae strum. And I think it sounds really, really good. When I play a lot of Bob Marley tunes and things like that, it's really effective. You don't need lots of complicated patterns. That's enough. And if you actually listen to the original recordings, that's what the rhythm instrument does. It's not doing lots of kind of complex and busy things. It's keeping it simple. And that's the reggae strum and the reggae drive.